He kept this buried for decades. At 62, Johnny Depp exposes the shocking ritual that nearly ruined everything he built. Once you hear what happened behind closed doors, you'll never forget it. Chapter 1. The first domino they needed to fall.
You threatened Miss Swan. Only a little.
Before Hollywood faced its reckoning, someone had to be the test case. Johnny Depp says he was chosen, and no one warned him. Johnny Depp never imagined he'd wake up one morning as the first domino in a cultural revolution he never signed up for.
Son, I'm Captain Jack Sparrow. Savvy?
Yet in his own words, he became a crash test dummy for me too, absorbing every blow that was meant to set an example. The timing wasn't just bad, it was ominous.
You want to live that kind of life? I wish you the best. I'll be on the other side somewhere, you know.
It was before Harvey Weinstein, he explained, as if reminding the world that the industry was already hungry for a scapegoat. When accusations began swirling, Depp says he felt something shift behind the scenes. Phone calls that stopped, colleagues who vanished, and meetings that were suddenly postponed indefinitely. He suspected then that these weren't random coincidences, but part of a calculated retreat. Hollywood needed to prove it was serious about change, and what better way than to hang someone with a famous face out to dry. For a while, he tried to convince himself it was all in his head, but the silence grew too loud to ignore. No warnings, no loyalty, just a quiet understanding that he would be the first test case to measure public appetite for punishment.
Like it?
Mm-hmm.
I accept it.
Okay.
No.
He watched as news outlets fed on every headline. Executives whispered about distancing strategies, and former allies rehearsed statements that sounded supportive but meant nothing. By the time he realized he'd been drafted into a cultural war he never asked to fight, it was too late to step back. I sponged it, took it all in, he confessed, like a man admitting he knew exactly what was happening but couldn't find the exit door. And as he tells it, this was only the beginning, because in Hollywood, once the first domino falls, no one can predict which one is next. Countless hours of digging brought this story to light. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe, so I can keep sharing more hidden truths with you. Chapter 2, the confetti that cut like knives.
And you forgot one very important thing, mate. I'm Captain Jack Sparrow.
They threw confetti when he walked on stage, then threw him to the wolves when the cameras stopped rolling. Johnny Depp says the hardest part wasn't the headlines or the courtroom cross-examinations. It was the applause that never meant anything. In public, he was celebrated. Smiles, champagne, standing ovations that looked genuine enough to believe. But behind the curtains, those same people were already plotting their exit. He calls it death by confetti, a phrase as bitter as it sounds. While the world watched him collect awards, Hollywood insiders were quietly crafting a different story, one that would keep their reputations spotless, even if it meant obliterating his. That confetti machine, because what do they want? Dough, he said, describing hypocrisy that never blinked. Agents and colleagues kept cashing checks while his reputation bled across front pages. Studios issued polished statements about support.
And that was without even a single drop of rum.
But it never went further than a press release. He remembers the phone calls that used to come every day, replaced by echoing silences that felt louder than any accusation. The dinners canceled without explanation. The same hands that once lifted champagne in his honor were now signing statements that condemned him. The deals that fell through at the last possible second. It wasn't just rejection, it was strategic erasure. What haunted him most wasn't simply that people turned away. It was realizing how much some of them profited by doing so. The machine that built him was now making money picking apart the wreckage. Magazines sold out every issue with his face on the cover. Executives signed new projects promising distance from controversy. Even his inner circle, he believes, calculated that staying silent was safer and more lucrative than standing by him. Late at night, he replayed it all, every handshake, every empty toast, and asked the same question: who else was in on it? The confetti wasn't the end. It was the first warning the knives were already out, and no one planned to stop swinging. Chapter 3, the three faces he can't forget.
One of the greatest things that I get to do as a dad, you know, just to sort of see that transformation from, you know, your kid to independent kid.
They were there when his kids blew out candles. He never imagined they'd be the first to vanish when the fire started. Out of all the betrayals Johnny Depp describes, none felt more personal or more poisonous than the three people he once called family. These weren't just colleagues or casual friends. These were the faces in every family photograph, the voices at every celebration, the hands lifting his children into the air while cameras flashed. They were at my kids' parties, throwing them in the air, he recalled, his voice tight with something between anger and disbelief. For years, he trusted them with everything, his home, his children, his secrets. But when the headlines started and the rumors became accusations, those same people disappeared faster than any stranger. Their sudden silence cut deeper than any front page headline. It wasn't only that they left, it was how quickly they erased every trace of the friendship they'd built. No phone calls, no messages, no warnings, just a void where loyalty used to live. He believes their fear wasn't really about him at all. It was about losing their place in the invisible club of Hollywood respectability.
You can say that I've been through a number of things here and there, but
about being seen taking the wrong side when reputations were at stake. The most frightening thing to them was making the right choice, he said, suggesting that doing the decent thing was too dangerous for people who had so much to lose. And in all the late night hours he spent replaying their betrayal, one thought kept echoing louder than the rest. They would never admit what they did, even if someone forced them to swear on a witness stand. The part that still stings isn't the loss itself, it's knowing that behind every smile they ever gave him was a hidden calculation, one he never saw coming. But as he'd soon realize, losing those friendships was only the beginning of learning who really stood behind him when the spotlight burned the hottest. But nothing prepared him for the moment a single article turned suspicion into a global spectacle. Chapter 4. The op-ed no one would forget.
Slaps me one more time. Hard.
Miss Heard, in her frustration and in her rage and her anger, she would...
One article, no names, no accusations on paper, yet it detonated his world with more force than any lawsuit ever could. It looked harmless at first, just another editorial in the Washington Post, printed on crisp white paper. Amber Heard never mentioned his name, never spelled out specific accusations, but the implication was enough to spark a chain reaction that would pull Johnny Depp into a storm no publicist could contain. The moment he read it, he knew what was coming. His hand shook as he flipped the page. It wasn't just anger, it was the cold certainty that everything he feared was already in motion. He could already hear the phone calls behind polished glass doors.
No one deserves to live like that. Not her, not me, not anyone.
The whispered conversations about damage control and who would be the first to pretend they'd never known him. Public opinion didn't wait for a verdict or a fact check. It needed a villain, and the op-ed handed it the perfect silhouette. He says it didn't matter that the piece was vague. Everyone knew who it was about, and the headlines exploded overnight. The strategy session started quietly, with lawyers offering reassurances it could be contained. But containment was a fantasy. Within months, it escalated into a $50 million defamation lawsuit, one that would put every private detail of their marriage on display for the world to devour. He realized a terrifying truth. In the court of public opinion, evidence was irrelevant. All that mattered was who told the story first. Speaking the truth was something I owed to my children, he said, knowing any attempt to stay silent would only make him look guilty. So he stepped into the fire, fully aware there might be no way out. Once the first headline is written, the real battle is proving you're not the monster everyone already decided you must be. Chapter 5. The trial that never ended.
Take you to the room of spiders. I don't like spiders, but may I have a
Millions tuned in for the spectacle, but to him, it felt like an autopsy performed while he was still breathing. Johnny Depp didn't just stand trial, he was dissected in real time. Every inch of his life peeled apart under the brightest spotlight the internet had ever seen. For 6 straight weeks, the courtroom transformed into a stage where his private pain became public entertainment, and strangers worldwide leaned in to watch every flicker of emotion cross his face. Every text message, every voicemail, every photo of bruises or broken glass was projected onto screens and instantly repackaged as memes. Clips of his testimony were sliced into sound bites, spliced with dramatic music, and shared by people who knew nothing about the truth but everything about going viral. The psychological toll was something no camera could capture. He described feeling like he was strapped to a table, forced to endure an autopsy of his character while still very much alive.
Well, I mean, you'd have to not have a pulse to feel at that point.
No matter what he said or how he said it, there was always a headline waiting to twist it into something unrecognizable. When the verdict finally came, $10,350,000 in damages awarded to him, it felt less like victory and more like being allowed to stand up after being pinned down for months. The jury gave me my life back, he said, but even that small measure of redemption came at a price most people could never understand. Because winning on paper didn't mean erasing the suspicion or the millions of opinions already etched across the internet forever. In the quiet moments that followed, one thought refused to leave him. Some people weren't watching to learn the truth. They were watching because they liked the spectacle. They needed a villain and a hero. And it didn't matter which role he played, as long as he played it in public. And if you think the verdict closed the story, just wait, because the final twist was still ahead. Chapter 6: The Settlement That Silenced Everyone. After years of warfare, the final twist wasn't a headline, but a quiet deal that left more questions than answers. It ended not with another explosive verdict, but with a single agreement that seemed almost too quiet for everything that had come before. In December 2022, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard announced they were finally settling the case. No more cameras, no more testimony, just a wire transfer and a pair of carefully worded statements that did little to clear the air. Heard agreed to pay $1 million, a fraction of the damages originally awarded, and the announcement was framed as closure. But Depp was quick to remind the world that money was never what he'd been fighting for. It couldn't buy back the years lost to public scorn or the friendships that evaporated the moment he became a liability. I feel at peace knowing I have finally accomplished that, he said, trying to put an ending on a story that never really wanted to close. To some, his words read like relief. To others, like a man exhausted enough to take any exit he could find.
I have a lot of relatives. Yeah.
You know, you have
they
this
stretch so far.
Heard's final statement sounded no less weary. I am heartbroken that the mountain of evidence still was not enough, she wrote, as if reminding everyone that her version of events hadn't changed. Only her willingness to keep fighting over them. Behind the public declarations, there were whispers that the settlement was less a finish line and more of a stalemate, that both sides were too tired or too damaged to keep dragging their private war through the press. In the shadows of Hollywood boardrooms, the same executives who once scrambled to distance themselves were already moving on to the next project, the next scandal, the next ritual sacrifice. No cameras rolled, no confetti fell, just an uneasy quiet that left everyone wondering if the truth had ever been settled. Chapter 7: The Comeback No One Clapped For.
Happy Earth Day.
See you soon.
Think soon, yeah. I love you.
Bye. Love you. Bye.
Thanks.
While Hollywood wrote him off, Johnny quietly rebuilt, and now claims the comeback narrative was another illusion. In the months after the settlement, the headlines shifted to other scandals and other names, but Johnny Depp was still there, working, creating, trying to piece together some version of normalcy. The public called it a comeback. He called it something else entirely. Honestly, I didn't go anywhere, he said, almost daring anyone to disagree. To him, the idea he'd vanished was just another convenient story, a way for Hollywood to pretend he'd been erased, so it could later pretend to welcome him back. He never really stopped, but he realized that to the world, absence is just a better story. The myth of the fallen star sells more headlines than the reality of a man quietly trying to heal. While tabloids obsessed over court transcripts, he was filming Minamata, disappearing into the role of W. Eugene Smith. He signed contracts with Dior and stepped onto the red carpet for Jan Dubarry.
Konnichiwa.
The film called his big return, but privately, he decided he'd never again ask permission to exist. He'd spent too many years believing acceptance was something to be earned back one project at a time. The truth was simpler and uglier. In an industry addicted to fresh scandals, survival didn't mean being embraced. It meant being tolerated just long enough to be profitable again. If I actually had the chance to split, I would never come back, he admitted, sounding less like a movie star and more like someone who finally understood that belonging had always been conditional. Though the cameras started flashing again, he knew nothing had changed. Because in Hollywood, applause can be as empty as the silence that follows. Chapter 8: The Ritual They'll Never Admit. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, he discovered the truth no one dared to say out loud. Years after the verdict, the settlement, and the half-hearted apologies, Johnny Depp still couldn't shake the feeling that what happened to him wasn't just a scandal. It was a ritual, a carefully staged spectacle that made everyone watching feel a little cleaner, a little safer, a little more righteous at his expense. He began to wonder if the machinery of Hollywood needed a sacrifice every so often to keep running. He remembered the carefully timed leaks to the press, the sudden, anonymous sources who all seemed to echo the same story, and the invitations to industry dinners that quietly vanished overnight. If destroying someone publicly was its way of proving it still had a conscience, if ruining reputations was a price the industry was always willing to pay, as long as it wasn't their own. I wanted from the hundreds of people I've met in that industry to see who was playing it safe, he said, still sounding like a man cataloging every face that turned away. He'd learned that loyalty could evaporate overnight, that trust was often a performance, and that the line between support and self-preservation was thinner than he'd ever imagined. When he looked back, it didn't feel like a simple case of betrayal or bad luck. It felt like a ritual no one would ever confess to taking part in, one that required a scapegoat to remind the public that the industry could still punish what it pretended to condemn. He hoped people would understand that fame wasn't just privilege and applause. It was a contract he'd never fully read. The part that said your life could be fed to the headlines if it kept the audience satisfied. And even now, after everything he's survived, he can't say for sure that the ritual is finished. He suspects it never really ends. It just waits for another moment of weakness, another rumor, another opportunity to prove that no one in Hollywood is ever truly safe. In the end, the real lesson wasn't about innocence or guilt. It was about how quickly your name can become a warning for everyone else, and how easily that warning gets mistaken for justice. If this glimpse behind Hollywood's curtain opened your eyes, subscribe and share your thoughts, because somewhere out there, another story like this is already unfolding, and someone else is about to become the next ritual sacrifice.